Joining with me today is Mr. Aravinda Korala, who is the CEO of KAL Associate Limited. Welcome to the program, Mr. Korala.
Thank you.
So now we know about ATMs and maybe multi-vendor machines. As consumers, we might not exactly understand the varieties of them and everything. So can you maybe describe a little bit about them?
So ATMs, the ATM industry is like any other industry where there are multiple vendors that make ATMs. So just like cars, there's a Volkswagen and so on, ATMs come in multiple varieties. However, the thing is, the software part of it is very important. So when you buy a car, you have software embedded inside the car and you buy it with that. You don't think about the software. But an ATM is much more complex from a software perspective because it is about the way in which consumers do transactions, and the software is the more important part, if you like, compared with the hardware. So what our software does is to allow any hardware to be used by the bank, because that's the important part from a bank's perspective, that they have the freedom, flexibility to buy from anybody, but then that the software is sophisticated enterprise software designed to be able to do all the things that the banks want to do with their customers.
Okay. And then, so what benefits would your software be providing to the banks which will be buying them?
Okay, so at a very high level, several benefits. Firstly, it reduces the cost of doing the things that banks want to do. Because if you have different software in all of your ATMs, then each one has to be modified and enhanced when you do new things. So it's about having a single way of doing it. So for example, if you compare ATMs with, say, laptops and PCs, you know that, of course, there's Microsoft Windows. So that's one way of doing certain things. So our software is similar. And the reason banks buy our software is so that they can A, buy hardware from anybody they like, but B, have a simple single way in which they can communicate with their customers and then do the enhancements and modifications in a single way.
Okay. Now, Mr. Korala, can you also maybe elaborate as to maybe how this software works inside of these vending machines?
Right. So ATM machines. So the software that we write, part of it sits inside the ATM. And what it does is to control the devices of the ATM, things like card readers, PIN pads, cash dispensers, and so on. And what makes it very complicated is that, firstly, the hardware is very complicated, and they have many different ways in which it can fail. So, as a consumer, you only see the good part, right? You see, you put your card in, you get cash out, and you're very happy. But what happens when something goes wrong? Because when something goes wrong, what you can't do is to say, sorry, there was an error, please contact your bank. You'll be very happy with that. So we need to clean up all those issues around hardware failures, maybe even software failures, maybe network connectivity failures. So there are lots and lots of failure modes, and maybe 70-80% of the software is about managing those failures and making sure that the customer is always happy, right? That he either got his cash or he didn't get the cash, but he didn't get money deducted from his bank account, right? That's what the customer wants. The bank wants to know that when something goes wrong, that everything has been sorted out and resolved. And there are certain scenarios that are maybe impossible to resolve from a software perspective. Maybe the power goes out and then the software is not available at that moment. But when it comes back out again, it has to clean up the mess that was there when the power went down.
Okay, so which means the software also helps to manage the entire system.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And a huge part of that, of what we do, is managing that ATM network. It's about maybe devices that are broken. Then to be able to signal to the bank that it is broken, we need to do something about it. What is broken? Maybe you need to send a technician to the ATM to fix it. But then what part should he take? Should he just turn up and bring all the parts? Or would it be better if he knew exactly what was wrong, so that when he went, he was ready, he went there ready to be able to fix it? What the banks are looking for is what they call availability of the ATM to be as low as possible, zero if possible. Okay, zero is not actually possible in reality because some stuff's going to go wrong and you have to kind of fix it, right? So they're focusing on getting that availability of the ATM as close to zero as possible, so that when, as a consumer, you go to the machine, it just works.
Okay. And Mr. Korala, let's also talk about now this management part. It actually, so the banks, they don't exactly have to go to different other ATM manufacturers. they would only have to come to you to get the managerial part done. Is that how it works?
So the hardware, they would go to other companies to buy the hardware. For the software, they would have a single software that runs on all the different ATM models that they have and all the different ATM manufacturers that they have, and they would manage the ATM network using our software. So it reduces the cost of doing that, but also it means that, see, one of the interesting things about ATMs is that banks want to change what they're doing with their ATM application regularly. So, some of our customers in the past, when they first met us, they were changing their software very rarely because it was difficult and expensive to do that. Now today, they change their software maybe once a month or once every 3 months. Now, why do they do that? Because there are new ideas about how they want to present transactions, new ideas about the things that customers might want to do, things like preferences, for example. A preference means that you can customize the way the ATM works on a per person basis, right? So that depending on whatever it is that the person wants, it can be customized to the way the person wants to use it, right? So these are new things that are happening in the software industry, for example, because if you go back to the Industrial Revolution and so on, when a car came out first, right, we all had the same kind of car. Maybe there were 2 or 3 models. But where software is going today is that when banks have millions of customers, each person can have the experience of the relationship with the bank customized to exactly what he or she wants.
Okay, so how different are you from your competitors? What's the difference here?
So this is quite interesting. Our 2 biggest competitors are 2 very large ATM hardware manufacturers. They make ATM hardware, but also they do software. So it's kind of a very asymmetric battle, right? Because we're focused just on software, and we do the best software we think in the world. And that's why today, for example, in terms of our install base, we are world number 2. Globally, our software runs in 80 countries. So we're very proud of that, very, very happy to be there. And we compete with these larger companies that they kind of do everything. They're jack of all trades, if you like. They do hardware, software, and everything. So they're not quite as focused as we are, right? So we kind of focus on making the software the very best possible in the world.
Okay. KAL has been established over 25 years ago. Let's talk about that journey as well.
So started on a very small scale, and we've grown the company over the years. So 25 years now, a little bit more than that even. ATMs have been around for much longer, about 50 years now. The ATM celebrated its 50 years anniversary last year.
Yeah.
So we've been kind of doing this business for about half that period of time. But the interesting thing is that the ATM industry, people might think, well, cash perhaps is going to go away or ATMs are going to go away. It's actually the opposite because, as I was saying at the beginning, it's not just about cash. It's about doing all the things that a bank needs to do with their customers, not just in the branch, but in all the places in which a customer would like to access bank services. Now, of course, one option is to use a mobile phone, and you can do certain transactions using a mobile phone, but certain other transactions you can't. So you can't get cash from a mobile phone. You can't deposit a check using a mobile phone. But also some of the security things around banking. The ATM is much more secure than a phone can ever be. And one of the reasons for that is that the ATM is owned by the bank, and the bank then controls the security of the ATM. While a mobile phone belongs to you and me, it means that there's a risk that the security of that could be more easily compromised, okay? So from a security point of view, it is much more, an ATM is much more secure than mobile phones can ever be. So from that perspective, when you look at doing banking transactions, it is safer to do it in an ATM. Now, from a bank's perspective, if you look at the cost of doing transactions, a branch transaction is very expensive. That's why around the world, especially in the Western world, banks are closing bank branches because they're expensive. Now, customers don't like that because how do you then access your banking transactions? Okay, one answer is through mobile phones or PCs. The other answer, they leave behind an ATM or a device that they might call a kiosk. ATMs and kiosks, these are self-service machines that can do these bank transactions. So that is what we do. It's about delivering these financial transactions that banks need to do anyway through an automated machine. And in fact, it's not just banking transactions we do. So, for example, in Malaysia, Some of the government transactions are done by us as well on a machine, where people can do things like update their driving license or change their expiry of their visa or immigration stuff, these kinds of things. So it's about doing transactions in public places for different industry segments. But for us, 90% of our business is banking related.
Okay. And Mr. Korala, now, when looking at China,
Yep.
we see that many of them, the public is actually using mobile payment methods instead of going into the bank and getting cash out of the ATM. So how do you see your company dealing with such a scenario in the future?
Right. So ATMs working with mobile phones is a very important part of what we do. So you can do things like pre-stage a transaction on a mobile phone. So let's say you're in a train and you say, when I arrive, I want to take some cash. I will set it up on my phone, and when you arrive at the ATM, you just tap with the phone onto the ATM and you get the cash that you wanted. Those kinds of transactions. It's interesting you mentioned China, because we've been doing business in China for maybe coming up to about 15 years, and we have a significant install base of our software in China. One of the biggest banks in the world, called China Construction Bank, runs our software, and they have 90,000 ATMs. It's a huge number compared with, say for example, just to kind of compare that with the Sri Lankan scenario, the total whole of Sri Lanka has 5,000 ATMs. My bank in the UK, the Royal Bank of Scotland, they have 6,000 ATMs. China Construction Bank has 90,000 ATMs. And China has 1 million ATMs, which is about double the number of ATMs that the US has. So China has kind of really taken this kind of doing these transactions in the public place to heart. And the ATMs that they use are also very sophisticated ATMs. They're not kind of like the low-cost ones. They're quite often some of the most sophisticated ATMs in the world are running in China.
Okay. So now that we've talked about China, let's also talk about other countries. What is happening in other countries?
Right. So one of the things we talked about a little earlier was financial inclusion, right? So that's kind of something that is very important and very interesting for me personally, as well as the company. Because if you look at countries, even rich countries like the US, there's a significant number of people who are not banked, who don't have bank accounts. Now, obviously, they need to be included in the financial system as well. And then if you start with the US, where there's a significant unbanked population, I think it's about 20 million people who are unbanked, right? And then you look at around the world in Asia and Europe, then as you come to poorer countries, the number of unbanked people is even more. And the Asian governments have all said, financial inclusion is a critical part of bringing more people into the financial system, about being able to do, give them loans, about micro lending, all those kinds of things. And it's very hard if people don't have bank accounts. And why do they not have bank accounts? Because it's not because they don't want one, but quite often because when they have one, they can't use it because the nearest bank might be 1 hour away by train or bus or whatever, right? And if you look at all of the villages in the world, many of them don't have banking available. Now, our technology is capable of bringing that to every village, because it is possible to do these transactions through machines that are much lower cost than an ATM.
Okay. So in that note, Mr. Korala, what do you think is going to happen in Sri Lanka? What's the future for Sri Lanka?
So future for Sri Lanka, I think from an ATM perspective, I think today the number of ATMs in Sri Lanka is at around 1/4 of the US number. So if you look at it from a per capita perspective, about 1/4. So if you said, is that because Sri Lankan people don't need cash? No, absolutely not. Sri Lankan people need cash as much as Americans need cash, right? So where the ATM industry is going is that most countries are converging towards that American number slowly. China is already there. Sri Lanka is on its way. So we're at about 1/4. So it'll be half, perhaps in a few years' time, and we'll get there. But even then, even when you have that kind of ratio of ATMs, which is about 1 ATM per 1,000 people, you still find that in village areas, in rural areas, there still isn't enough access. I live in Scotland, as you know, and in Scotland, the bigger cities, there are lots of ATMs. But when you drive into the countryside, then quite often the nearest ATM might be 10 kilometers away. And for people living in those villages, it's a big challenge because they don't have cash available and so on. And then when they spend cash in a shop, then the shopkeeper has to take the money 10 miles away, right, to deposit the cash, which if you think about it makes no sense, right? You're going 10 miles to get the cash, come back, spend it, and then the shopkeeper has to go back and deposit it. So there is technology that allows the cash to recirculate in those villages. So that's some of the things that we are doing so that the cash doesn't have to be moved around. And of course, moving cash around, is very expensive, right? Because you can't just do that on a bicycle or something because you need lots of security and you need a big, armed guard to do that. It's costly. It is, it puts out CO2 into the air as you move all these things around in big kind of protected vehicles and so on. So if you can remove all of that, then it reduces the cost of cash in a country. It improves financial inclusion because you can deliver transactions to more people at a lower cost.
Okay. And that's actually very interesting, Mr. Dr. Korala. And let's also talk about your innovations. What is it that your company is planning to do?
So, we have done a lot of innovation in the past, and we continue to innovate. We spend a lot of money on R&D. About 15% of our engineering capacity goes into R&D. If you look on our website, you'll see that we've got lots of world firsts. So we've done a lot of things over the years that are the first in the world, and we continue to do that. And we have some projects now, some of it confidential, that we'll be unveiling soon and so on, about doing things for the very first time. So lots of innovation. We will continue to focus on R&D because that's very, very important, because you need to stay right up there with the latest requirements of the industry, but also look at what it is that banks haven't asked us just yet, but they're going to ask us next year, right? We need to be ready for that.
Okay. Well, in that note, Mr. Dr. Korala, we have to say goodbye for tonight.
Thank you very much.
But then we wish you all the very best for all your future endeavors and for your company as well.
Thank you very much indeed.
Okay.